For coming. The topic tonight is what parents can do to prevent their children from ever needing therapy, or the way I put it, they shouldn't have to end up in my office, Khalila. Is there anything that parents can do? And the answer is very simply, in one word, yes. Now, if you have to leave, you can leave now, but if you want to hear the explanation, the parish is, there is something that parents can do that's very critical to ensure that the children will not, Khalila, ever need therapy later on. Now I want to introduce this topic this evening with a short Maisa that took place about, I can tell you exactly, it was in 1971. So you do the math, how many years ago that was. I was working for a foster care agency. I was assigned a case of 4 Yesomim, whose mother, Alas Shalom, was nifter at an untimely age, and she left over 4 pitzalach that were put into foster care because the father couldn't manage them on his own. And it was my job to supervise the foster homes of these 4 children. So I went to each home and met with the foster parents to make sure that the children were being adequately cared for and properly taken care of as best as possible, and met with the children. I met with each one of the children separately. They were in different foster homes. There wasn't one foster home for all 4 children. And the oldest child was, I think, 7 years old, the oldest of the 4. I went to that home, and when I came to the home, the foster mother was expecting me, made an appointment, and she went to bring the foster child out to meet me, to talk a little bit, and she couldn't find the child. She looked here, she looked there, couldn't find the child. The child was hiding. She was very apologetic and embarrassed. She couldn't produce the child. I said, it's okay. She'll turn up. She was hiding somewhere. It's all right. But I realized this child had sensed that I had come to speak to her, I guess. Actually, I had seen her peeking out from behind the doorway when I first walked in, so I knew she was there. And I realized she must have had some concerns about meeting with another stranger and didn't want to speak with me. But I was concerned about her because she seemed to be not adjusting very well, dealing with her own grief and tragedy. And I realized I really need to speak to the father. It was hard to reach him. He was working till we could make arrangements to meet. And finally, after a few weeks, made an appointment and met with the father. And he says, I get a mazel tov. I said, what's the mazel tov? He's engaged. I said, oh, very good. He says, with 4 small children, he needs to get remarried. I say, I understand that. Very happy for you, mazel tov. So the reason I wanted to meet with you actually was I wanted to know, how did you explain to your children that your wife was nifter? He says, I didn't. You didn't explain to them she was nifter? How did they find out? How did they know? He said they came in, they saw me crying. I realized the mother is gestorben. Okay. He said, but you didn't discuss it with your children afterwards? He says, no. He said, listen, life has to move on. You see, I'm getting remarried. You can't dwell on the past. So I'm not saying you should dwell on the past. A body, you have to get remarried. You have small children, you need someone to take care of them. But you didn't have any discussions with your children, especially the oldest, about her feelings, losing her mother. He gives me this long stare, like he's looking at me from many years away. And he strokes his beard and he says to me, there seems to be this newfangled idea going around these days. You're supposed to speak to your children. That's not the way I grew up. He said, I grew up, if a kid jumped on the Rebbe's desk, you got a smack and you send him back to his seat. Today, supposed to talk to your children. Well, I realized I wasn't going to get through to him so easily. And I understood why the daughter was having a hard time dealing with her feelings. He said, listen, you don't have to talk about feelings, you just move on. What do you have to talk about it for? I said, well, you need to be able to express your feelings. He said, well, I didn't express mine. I said, but wait a minute, didn't you tell me your kids came in, they saw you crying? He said, yes, he was crying. Of course, heard his wife was nifter. Of course he was crying. He got the call from the hospital that she was nifter. I said, well, did you see your daughter cry? Did she have an opportunity to express her grief? Children need help in expressing their feelings. They need to be able to talk about it. They need to talk to their parents. Well, this father obviously was, as they'd say, off the charts and didn't understand the main point of the Vaad this evening is that, yes, maybe there is a newfangled idea going around today, but it's very, very important to speak to your children, to make time to speak to them. And it's the one single thing the parents can do to ensure that the children will grow up emotionally healthy, normal, and have a healthy, normal psychosocial development. Now, that's actually one of the things that upsets me the most. I don't do anything about it, but it upsets me when I walk down the street and I see obviously a parent with a child. Could be a father, could be a mother, could be walking with the child, holding the hand, or pushing a carriage, or holding one hand and pushing carriage with the other, but obviously a parent with the children. And I see the parent yapping away on a cell phone. You have some private time with the child. You're doing an errand, you're taking them somewhere, they're going with you somewhere. You have an opportunity to talk. I notice that nowadays there is a newfangled way of making a baby carriage or a stroller that the child faces the parent, which I think is a brilliant idea, and I don't know why they didn't think of that earlier. When a child gets pushed in a stroller nowadays, you can position the child so they're facing the parent. And even if they can't talk yet, they see the parent's expressions, there's some interaction, there's some connection, there's some bonding going on. Instead of the old-fashioned way, you sit the kid down, he's looking ahead, and he doesn't know who's pushing. The Abish is pushing, you're pushing. It's getting pushed, it doesn't have any connection with the parents. So, yes, the important thing is spending time speaking with children. It seems so pashut and so obvious, but unfortunately today, what's obvious isn't always so obvious, and it needs to be emphasized. I want to share with you a research study that was done, a fascinating study that was done in 2004. They took a sample of over 4,000 children and adolescents. And what they were looking for, the researchers were looking to see what would be the predictor and the critical factor that could prevent serious mental health issues, such as eating disorders. Now, eating disorders, we know, are a very serious problem. Young people, teenagers today, Rahman al-Islam, can develop any one of a number of eating disorders that can lead to serious medical problems, and in extreme cases, even Khalila death can come as a result of eating disorders. It's a serious problem, and certainly it's a major mental health issue. They wanted to see what kind of parenting style or practices would contribute or prevent these things. So they interviewed the over 4,000 children, determined how many of them had these serious mental health problems, and then they assessed the parenting in the homes where these kids were growing up. They interviewed the mothers and the fathers, and they did extensive surveys. And they were looking for what would be the critical factor in the homes that would differentiate the homes of children that would eventually develop mental health problems or eating disorders, and the homes where children would grow up without having these problems. And it was amazing, the findings of this study. You think, what kind of parenting technique, what kind of style, what kind of attitude, what kind of approach dealing with children leads to more healthy development, and what Chalila Fakert. They found that the children were least likely to eventually develop a serious mental health problem if they grew up in a home where the parents ate supper 3 to 4 times a week with the children. That was the critical factor. Not strict, lenient, harsh, structured, easygoing, short-tempered. No. Eating supper 3 to 4 times a week with the children was the critical factor. Differentiating the group of children that grew up emotionally healthy, normal, and those that Chalila had mental health problems. Now, the point... Excuse me? I'm going to get to that. Baruch Shekivanta. The point, obviously, is not the exact number. So people should think, well, we have 3 sudas every week. On Shabbos, we're Yotzei, we got the 3. The point isn't the exact number. The point is the opportunity of sitting around a table, the whole family together, eating a meal, is tremendously therapeutic and fosters good mental health. Now, what the researchers found was it didn't matter what happened at the table. Was there fighting at the table? Were kids cheppering each other? Was there sibling rivalry? Did the parents lose their temper? It didn't matter. It didn't matter what was discussed or how it was discussed, just that they sat together as a family and had a meal together. Now, I know people try to be medaic. Is it 3? Is it 4? Do you have to have 1 plus the Shabbos Suda? Is the Shabbos Suda enough? That's not the point, Rabbosai. The point is spending time with your children, and spending time around a meal can be very, very effective and beneficial in preventing future mental health problems of all children. The way I like to emphasize this is, I hope there's no English teachers in the audience, because if there are, please excuse what I'm going to say, you may not approve. We know that love is a 4-letter word. Do you know how children spell the word love? 4 letters. How do they spell it? Well, I'll tell you. Children do not spell the word love T-O-Y-S. That's not how children spell love. And they also don't spell it G-E-L-T. They also don't spell it that way. How do children spell the word love? T-I-M-E. That's how children spell love. Time. Just spending time. You know, I was speaking about this very subject. It's one of my hot topics that I like to talk about when I have an opportunity. In London, a couple of years ago, and I was mentioning this point about the effectiveness of having a meal together with the family. And one of the members of the audience was saying, you know, it's so hard to do. Husband comes home late at night. He can't come home earlier. He's working. He's out till he gets home. And the kids have to eat earlier. They can't wait till the father gets home. They're starved. At the end of the day, they barely have lunch in yeshiva. They come home right off the bus. They got to have supper. So we can't have supper as a family. I mean, does that mean the kids are going to have problems later on because they don't have supper as a family? Well, that wasn't the point. The point was just being able to spend time talking with your children. Well, there was another member of the audience said, you know, I would like to comment on that. I said, oh, by all means, please feel free. This other person in the audience said, you know, we decided, even before we had heard this talk, we decided as a family that it might be a nice idea. One year, we decided Rosh Chodesh, we're going to have a Rosh Chodesh Suda for the family together during the week. Shabbos we have the 3 Sudas every week, but have a meal once during the week as a family. So my husband made an effort, she said, and he worked his schedule around that one day he was going to come home earlier than usual. And one day the kids were not going to have supper right away when they got off the bus from yeshiva. They'll take a little snack, they're going to wait till Tati comes home. And we sat together and had a Rosh Chodesh Suda. We didn't have any special program. We didn't say any special Divrei Torah. We just had a Rosh Chodesh Suda as a family. The kids were so excited about it. They said, please, could we do it again? Could we do it again next Rosh Chodesh? She said, I want you to know, we only do it once a month, not every week. Once a month, we have Rosh Chodesh Suda together as a family. We've been doing it for a few months, she said. I want you to know, it has totally changed the atmosphere in our home. One supper a month, Rabbosai. It's changed the atmosphere in our home, she said. I can attest to it. It's a different atmosphere, a different feeling. There's a closeness, a warmth, there's something intangible that took place as a result of one supper a month, not even every week, together as a family. It's extremely powerful, extremely helpful. I'm not saying it has to be done a certain number of times. It's the concept, just sitting around the table together as a family. Whatever you discuss, whatever you talk about, is like an inoculation, like a vaccine. It's the one most important thing that parents can do for their children to help prevent them ever landing up in my office or another therapist's office. Now, some people might be listening to this and say, come on, this is this psychology, schmology business, you know what? Wo steht das? It's not is this a Yiddish? There's a test that was done, a study that was done on Goyim. Sure, you're supposed to be mechanech your children. You're supposed to teach them Torah. Of course. You have to be madrich them. But you have to eat a meal with them? A Shabbos, of course you have to. Shabbos, Yontif, of course. But who says you have to do it during the week? So, listen to a pasuk in Tehillim. Pasuk that should be familiar to most people. Eshlecha gegeben paria biyarkasei beisecha. Banecha kshile zeisim shaviv l'shulchanecha. It's Kapitel Kuf Chav Ches, Pasuk Gimel. Your children, banecha, kshile zeisim, they should be like shoots, young shoots of olive trees around your table. Well, it's a nice metaphor. It's a nice mashal describing children. Yeah. So, what do you see from that? Just saying it's nice whenever they're around your table. So take a look at what the Radak says on that pasuk, Rabbosai. I'm going to read it. I'm quoting the Radak on Kuf Chav Ches, Pasuk Gimel. Be'ez shetoicha, whenever you'll eat, you tamid saviv l'shulchanecha. Repeat it, Rabbosai. You tamid saviv l'shulchanecha. Now, I'm not saying it has to be tamid, but the Radak is saying when you're eating, your kids should be there with you. Not that you eat later and they eat earlier and you never see each other. Sometimes it's impractical. I'm not saying it has to be every time. But there's certainly a mucker in Torah. The parents should be eating with children whenever they can. Again, it's not the number of times, it's not the amount of time, it's the interaction, it's the conversation. I want to end with one more case example. About 30 years ago, I don't remember exactly, I was working with a young woman who had some issues, I think maybe with shidduchim, I don't remember exactly, it's over 30 years. I don't remember every case so clearly. Some people I remember better than others. And I noticed that whenever I asked her for background information, she was very resistant to giving me any details. She wanted to stick with the here and now, with whatever the issue was she was focusing on, and I was okay with that. But therapists like to know where someone's coming from, what the background is, where the sources are, what the development was earlier. Whenever I asked her about her parents, she changed the subject. Obviously, it was a sensitive issue, didn't want to get into it, I didn't pursue it. After about maybe the 6th or 7th session I had with her, she mentioned that she had a conversation with her father on the phone about something. She came from out of town. She had moved to New York, I think for shidduchim purposes, I don't remember exactly. And she was working in New York. And she had a phone call about something with one of her parents, with her father. So I saw this as maybe a window, another opportunity. Let me try again, I said, you mentioned you just had this conversation with your father on the phone. You never really told me about your father. Could you tell me a little bit about him? I don't have a sense of what your relationship is like with your father growing up. Just to get a better sense of who you are. She was silent. She looked down at the floor. I waited. I could tell she was wrestling with herself. I could practically hear the voice in her head saying, should I tell him? Shouldn't I tell him? Should I get into it? Shouldn't I get into it? It seemed like an hour, but it was more like 2 minutes. She was just staring at the floor. And I realized, Meir, I said to myself, keep your mouth shut and just wait. Maybe she'll open up a little bit. It's not an easy thing to do when there's a silence. You have to judge sometimes to break the silence or to leave the silence. I chose to leave the silence. It wasn't more than 2 minutes. She lifted up her eyes and they were red. And I realized this is a very, very emotional topic for her. And I just sat there quietly to let her share whatever she felt comfortable with. She said, you asked me about my relationship with my father? You want to know what my relationship with my father was all about? I'll tell you. I'll tell you one brief anecdote, and that will describe my whole relationship with my father. I said, okay. She said, one year when I was a teenager, she said, this is a young woman in her 20s, early 20s. She says, when I was a teenager, maybe 14, 15, don't remember exactly. At the Pesach Seder, I stole the afikomen. Because my brothers got it ahead of me. One year I stole the afikomen. So my father came time for tzafon, wants the afikomen. Okay, I had it. He's trying to bargain with me. What do you want for the afikomen? She says, what I'd like for the afikomen is a conversation. That's what she asked for the afikomen. A conversation with her father. I was so touched by that. What a painful childhood this young woman must have had. That she was so disconnected with her father that what she asked for the afikomen was a conversation. It obviously made a roshim on me. A couple of years later, I was talking on a parenting topic on a Friday night program, and I mentioned this story to drive home the point that I'm making to you tonight of how important it is to spend time with your children in conversation about anything. And Sunday morning I came into my office. There's a message on my machine, obviously left Motzei Shabbos, and I listened to the message on my answer machine. And she said, Dr. Wikler, you probably didn't notice me in the audience Friday night, but I was there when you spoke, and I recognized her voice right away. It was this young woman who I had stopped seeing. We had finished our work. I hadn't seen her for a couple of years. I didn't realize she was in the audience. large crowd, separate seating, and I didn't see all the way in the back where the women were, who was there, and she was obviously in the audience. And all of a sudden, like, achabtet sitta, maybe she's upset with me. Maybe she thought I'm sharing private, confidential information. Maybe she's telling me I should expect a letter from her lawyer. Who knows what she's going to come up with? I didn't know. And I'm listening to the rest of the message. She said, I was there in the audience, and I heard how you quoted something I told you in a session. And I'm waiting. What's coming next? She said, I just want to tell you from the bottom of my heart, thank you for remembering me. It made such a rosham on her that I remembered something she had told me, and she felt so flattered and honored that not only I remembered it, but I shared it in a talk that I gave. And why am I telling you this story? Because I hope you'll remember her also. And you'll remember what she told me. And you'll remember why she told it to me and what it meant. And you'll get the message, even though her father obviously never did. But hopefully you'll get the message that it's important to spend time, if you can over a meal, even if not over a meal, but just spend time talking with your children. Because children spell the word love, T-I-M-E. And that's the takeaway from tonight. And that's the one single most important thing that parents can do to ensure that the children will never end up in my office. I just want to make a couple of quick announcements before we end. The next Vaad will be, Be'ez Hashem, 4 weeks from tonight. Comes out July 17th. It's a week before Shiva B'Tammuz. And if anybody has any suggestions for topics or any comments or feedback, you can email them to chinuchvad123@gmail.com. And thanks to Reb Yitzchak Gross, our very able-bodied coordinator who set that up for us and who helps publicize the Vaad, Yisher Koyach, to Reb Yitzchak. And anybody has any comments about the Vaad or any feedback, you can feel free to email that to Reb Yitzchak, and that will be forwarded to me. And thank you again for coming.